Between 1891 and 1904, at least 11 women vanished along a single stretch of road in the Missouri Ozarks. They were travelers, school teachers, a widow moving north, a young photographer, a girl of 19 walking to her sister's wedding. Every one of them was last seen near the mouth of a wooded hollow where a narrow trail broke away from the main road and slipped down into the trees. And at the end of that trail there was a cabin. 2 brothers lived inside it. They were polite. They were helpful. They offered warm food and a dry bed to anyone caught out after dark. And not one of the women who accepted that offer was ever seen walking back out. Today, you will not find that hollow on any modern map. The road was rerouted, the county ledgers were thinned, the names of those 2 brothers were struck from the census rolls as though they had never drawn a single breath in this world. But the story survived anyway. It survived in the mouths of the people who lived there, handed down in a low voice from porch to porch, because the people who lived there were never permitted to write it down. This is the account of the hollow cabin, and of the men who kept it, and of the effort that came afterward to make certain you would never hear a word of it. To understand what happened in that hollow, you have to understand the land itself. The Ozark Highlands in the 1800s were not the gentle hills that tourists drive through today. They were a folded, secretive country of limestone ridges and sinkholes and caves that ran for miles underground. Whole valleys sat hidden between the ridgelines, cut off from the nearest town by half a day of hard travel. Settlers who came into that country did not spread out evenly. They pooled into the hollows, and each hollow became its own small world, with its own rules and its own long silences. The road that ran past the hollow in our story was one of the few reliable ways to move north through that part of the country. It was a trade road, a mail road, a road that women travelling alone were told was safe because it was used. That was the first lease the land told them. A used road is not a safe road. It only means more people pass the same dark places, one after another, never knowing who passed before them or whether they ever arrived at all. The brothers were named in the oldest tellings as Elias and Cormac Vance. They had come into the hollow sometime in the late 1880s, and the people in the valley below could never quite say where they had come from before that. They spoke a little strangely, the old accounts agree, with an accent no one could place and a way of choosing words that felt a beat too formal, as if the language were something they had learned rather than something they had been born into. They kept to themselves. They came down to the trading post perhaps 4 times a year, always together, always paying in old coin, and they never once brought anyone down from the hollow with them. What they did have, and what everyone remembered, was the cabin. It was too large. That is the detail that survives in every version of the story, the detail no one could ever explain. A structure of that size, deep in a hollow that grew almost nothing, built by 2 men who farmed nothing and traded nothing, and seemed to have no trade at all. Some who saw it said it had been added to over years, wing after wing, until it sprawled back into the hillside itself. Others swore parts of it were older than the brothers, older than the county, that the Vance men had simply found the stone shell of something already standing there and closed it in with timber and moved inside. Whatever the truth of it, the cabin was the one thing about the Vance brothers that everyone agreed on, and the one thing not a single soul among them could ever truly account for. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker. And I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of the deleted hollow cabin case, the survey map that was struck from the county record, the list of the 11 women who never came home, the coroner's own handwritten note that was never filed. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. The first disappearance the valley could later tie to the hollow was a woman named Sarah Kesterson. She was a school teacher travelling north in the autumn of 1891 to take a position in a town she never reached. She was seen at the trading post at the foot of the road buying dried apples and asking how much daylight she had left. The man who sold her the apples told her the truth, that she would not make the next town before dark, and that she would do well to turn back and wait for morning. She thanked him and went on anyway. That was the last time anyone in the valley saw her face. When she failed to arrive, letters went back and forth for months in the slow way of that time. Her family assumed an accident on the road, a fall, a robbery, a river crossing gone wrong. No one thought of the hollow because no one below knew anyone lived up there who would trouble a traveller. The Vance brothers were strange, but strange men were common in that country, and being strange was not a crime. Sarah Kesterson became a name in a letter, then a name in a Bible, then nothing at all. But she was not the last. Over the next several years the pattern repeated, and it repeated in a way that should have been impossible to miss, except that each disappearance happened to a stranger, a person passing through, a person whose absence was felt somewhere else entirely and never in the valley itself. A widow the following spring, a pair of sisters the year after that, which was the first time two vanished at once. A photographer, a young woman carrying a heavy camera and a case of glass plates, who had told an innkeeper a full day south that she meant to photograph the old stone formations in the hills. She reached the trading post. She asked about the hollow by name, the accounts say, because someone had told her there was something worth photographing up there. She went up the trail. Her camera was never found. Neither was she. There were others whose names survived only in fragments. A milliner from Springfield who had written ahead to a cousin that she would arrive by the middle of the month, and who was still being expected when the first snow came. A young mother travelling to bury her own mother remembered because she had a child with her at the trading post and left without the child, having sent the little one on ahead with a family going the other way. That child grew up and spent a lifetime writing letters to sheriffs and newspapers, and every letter came back with the same answer, which was no answer at all. And the girl of 19, walking north to stand up at her sister's wedding, who stopped only long enough to fill a canteen and ask whether the road ahead was lonely. She was told that it was. She went anyway, the way all of them went anyway, because the road was used and a used road felt safe, and because the last of the daylight makes a person want to keep moving, rather than sit down in the dark among strangers. What tied them together was not obvious at first, and that was the terrible genius of the place. They did not vanish from the valley. They vanished from the space between the valley and everywhere else, a stretch of 9 or 10 miles, where a person had left one world and had not yet entered the next. When someone disappears at home, the home notices at once. When someone disappears on the road, each end of that road quietly assumes the other end still holds them. The town they had left assumed they had arrived. The town they were bound for had never known to expect them on any particular day. And so the women fell one after another into the gap between two assumptions, and that gap was exactly wide enough to hold every last one of them without a sound. By the time enough years had passed for a pattern to become visible, the pattern belonged to no one. No single family had lost more than one. No single town had noticed more than a single empty chair at a single table. The losses were spread so thin across so many far apart places that only a person standing at the one point they all had to pass through could ever have added them together. And there was exactly one such point in all that country, and exactly one such person standing at it, keeping quiet count while the years went by. He did not want the count. He simply could not help noticing that the same short road kept swallowing the same kind of traveller and never once giving one back. It was the sisters who first made someone in the valley uneasy, because two women do not both fall down the same ravine, and both drown in the same shallow creek, and both simply cease to exist on the same afternoon. A man named Josiah Hail, who ran the trading post in those years, began to keep a private tally. He was not an educated man, but he was a careful one, and he wrote down in the back of his account book the name of every traveller who bought supplies for the northern road and asked about the distance to the next town. Then he wrote down whether word ever came back that they had arrived. The list of those who arrived was long. The list of those who did not was shorter, but it was not empty, and every single name on it was a woman travelling alone, and every one of them had gone up the road toward the hollow in the last hour of daylight. Before we move on to what Josiah Hail did next, stop for a second. What you just heard about that tally, the account book with 2 columns of names, is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original Trading Post ledger. The 2 columns, the missing weeks, it's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back, because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. Josiah Hail did not go to the law, and it is worth understanding why. The nearest sheriff was a full day's ride away, and the law in that country followed money and property, not the disappearance of women who belonged to no one nearby. Hail knew a report would earn him a shrug, and a question he could not answer, which was where the bodies were. He had no bodies. He had 2 columns in an account book. So he did what people in the hollows did when the law was useless to them. He gathered a few men he trusted, and one grey morning in the autumn of 1898, 7 of them went up the trail together. What they found at the top has been told so many times and changed so much in the telling that it is hard now to separate what was seen from what was feared. But the oldest and plainest accounts, the ones closest to the men who walked up that trail, agree on a handful of things, and those things are enough. The cabin was empty, the brothers were gone, and had been gone, it seemed, for some time. The fires were cold, but the cabin had not been abandoned the way a home is abandoned. It had been left in the middle of use, as if the 2 men had stepped out one evening and simply never come back. There were plates on the table, there was food gone to rot, and there were belongings that did not fit 2 solitary men who let no one up the trail. A woman's travelling coat, folded neatly on a chest, a hairbrush, a single glass photographic plate cracked across one corner, left there on a shelf. The men counted the rooms and could not make the number come out right. From the outside, the cabin was large but ordinary enough. A long, low structure banked into the hill. From the inside, it refused to be counted. Rooms opened off rooms. A hallway that should have ended at the back wall of the hillside kept going, deeper than the hill had any business allowing, until the men lost their nerve and turned back rather than learn where it led. One of them, a farmer named Tom Ansley, repeated one sentence about that hallway for the rest of his life, and never added to it. He said the house was bigger on the inside than the hill it was buried in, and I have never once been able to explain that, and I have stopped trying. They did not find the women, they did not find the brothers, they found the belongings and the wrongness of the rooms, and one more thing, in the deepest room they were willing to enter. On the wall, cut carefully into the timber, there were marks, rows of them. Not names, not words in any language the men knew, but a careful repeating figure scored again and again, into the wood, in neat lines like a record being kept. A tally. And the men who counted the marks that day counted far more of them than there were women missing from Josiah Hail's account book. As if the brothers had been keeping their record far longer than the valley had noticed, and in far more places than this one hollow. They burned the cabin. That much every account agrees on. 7 frightened men set fire to the largest building any of them had ever seen, and watched it burn until nothing was left but the stone shell the timber had been built around. But the stone did not burn, of course. Stone does not burn. And when the timber was gone, the men were left looking at the thing that had been there before the Vance brothers ever arrived, the shell they had closed themselves inside. And not one of the 7 men would ever describe it. Not to the sheriff, not to their families, not to their own children, who begged them all their lives. Tom Ansley took his single sentence about the hallway to his grave, and never spoke of the stone at all. Now this is where the buried history runs straight through the heart of the story, where it stops being folklore and becomes something you can trace in the record itself, in the shape of the hole where the record should be. Because after 1898, the hollow cabin case does not fade the way old stories fade. It is removed, and once you learn to see that difference, you cannot unsee it. The county kept a road survey. On the earliest surviving version, the trail into the hollow is drawn and the hollow is named. On the next version, dated only a few years later, the trail is gone. The hollow has no name, and the main road has been redrawn to bend wide around that whole section of hillside, adding miles for no reason a modern engineer can explain. The road was not improved, it was turned away. Someone decided travellers should no longer pass the mouth of that trail, and rather than post a warning, they erased the reason for it and moved the road. The census tells the same story in the same silent way. The Vance brothers appear in no federal count, not present, not absent, not deceased. They are simply not there. In a decade when the census reached into the deepest hollows to count and tax every soul it could find. 2 men lived in the largest structure in the county for over 10 years, and the official memory of the nation holds no trace of them at all. That is not an oversight. An oversight leaves a blank. This leaves a shape, the shape of something that was there and was taken out. And Josiah Hail's account book, the one careful record that documented the disappearances, in 2 honest columns vanished within a year of the burning. Hail told a neighbour that a stranger in town clothes, a man who spoke the way the Vance brothers had spoken, a beat too formal, had come to the trading post and offered to buy the book. Hail refused. The book was gone before the next spring, and Hail, the one careful witness to the whole affair, stopped speaking of it and moved his family out of the valley within 2 years. So consider what you are actually looking at. A cluster of disappearances, real women with real names, all tied to one place. A structure that could not be counted from the inside. 2 men who came from nowhere, the record admits, and left no trace when they were finally sought. And then, after the fact, a quiet and thorough effort to reroute the road, thin the census, and remove the one book that told the truth. Every hard edge of this story has been sanded away by someone, and the sanding is the part you can still prove. The buried history framework, whatever you make of its larger claims, asks one useful question, and it fits this hollow like a key. Not what happened, but who benefits when the record is erased, and how were they able to do it so quietly across so many kinds of record at once? A frightened valley can forget. It cannot rewrite the county survey, delete 2 men from the federal census, and make a witness sell his own account book. That takes reach, an authority that operates above the valley and answers to no one in it, one that cared more about a clean record than about 11 women staying found. We do not know what the Vance brothers were, and the honest answer is that we cannot know, because the people who could have told us were the same people who made certain the telling would never survive. Maybe they were only 2 clever, patient murderers who chose the perfect country to work in, where strangers vanished into the geography and no one downstream connected the dots for years. That ordinary answer is terrifying enough on its own, but the ordinary answer does not explain the hallway that ran deeper than the hill, or the tally with far too many marks, or the stone shell that 7 grown men refused for the rest of their lives to describe. And above all, it does not explain the erasure, the careful, coordinated, official removal of every trace, which no pair of backwoods killers could ever have arranged from beyond a burned cabin they never returned to. Someone finished their work for them. Someone made the road bend away so no more travellers would ever stand at the mouth of that trail at dusk and wonder whether to go up. And if you accept that, you have to accept the harder thing underneath it. The road was not bent to protect the travellers. If it were, you post a sign, you tell the story, you make the danger known. The road was bent to protect the hollow, to keep it quiet, to keep it fed, or to keep it sleeping, or simply to keep it out of every record until everyone who had climbed that trail was safely dead. The hollow is still there, the road still bends wide around it for no reason the maps will give you. Local people will still, if you press them and they trust you, tell you not to walk that stretch of old trail after dark, and they will not tell you why, because their grandparents never told them why either. Only that some records are thinned for a reason, and some roads are turned aside for a reason, and the reason is almost never the one written down. If this is the kind of history that keeps you up at night, the history that was removed rather than lost, then this channel is where we dig it back out. Subscribe, because next week we walk into another place the maps decided you were better off never finding. The link to the full reconstructed document is in the description. And the next time a road bends for no reason you can see, ask yourself what used to stand at the mouth of the trail it turned away from.